Welcome to Good Goodbyes, the funeral facts podcast. We are really glad you found us. In this podcast, me, Simon, a funeral director,
And me, Tina, I'm an independent celebrant.
are going to discuss all things funeral in an informal space to demystify what happens when we say goodbye.
Based on your questions and queries, Si and myself are two industry professionals that are going to chat through the hows, whats, and wherefores. We actively work in the funeral industry in Devon in the UK. So, we hope you enjoy the episode ahead. Welcome to Good Goodbyes. Hello and welcome to Good Goodbyes. This is Tina, and I'm really thrilled to have Emma Gray with me today, who's going to talk about a range of different things. But Emma's official title is that she is a grief and life coach. So, welcome, Emma. It's really fantastic to have you here.
Oh, thank you. I am thrilled to be here.
Yeah. Shall we just start by telling the listeners a little bit about what you do?
Oh, golly, right. This is where I'm really bad at having it in a snapshot. So I used to be a Wilson probate lawyer, ironically. So I did death and dying as a job. Very much from the paperwork perspective. Then really sadly in December 2013, my Royal Marine husband, fighting fit no longer, got diagnosed with terminal esophageal cancer. And that's where we first linked in through hospice care and all the rest of it. I kept my job going. I kept it going when we had 6 houses in 6 years in the military, when he was poorly. And then after he died, I went back. I had a surprising amount of compassionate leave, but I went back. And then I kind of decided that we had organised the paperwork really well. And what that had done is it had given me what I call an emotional handrail through my grief. And it also gave me a bit of financial freedom. And I realised that I was close to burning out. So I decided to hit pause. Work didn't really believe me. So long story short, they tried to persuade me to become partner, blah, 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 and all the rest of it. And in the end, I went on sabbatical, supposedly, so that I had a job to go back to if I wanted to. Work my notice period, handed over my clients, and then spending a bit of time with my kids suddenly had a different lens on it, because 2 weeks after I walked out the office, we went into lockdown. And I think it was in lockdown that I had a bit of an existential crisis. I realized that not being a lawyer, I was suddenly really proud that I used to be a lawyer, and I kind of had lost that kind of tag. I knew I wasn't a wife anymore, but I didn't really want to be a widow. I love my children to pieces, but it's never been enough for me just to be a mum. And that's where I started rainbow hunting, really just to share my story. And then what it's morphed into is grief and life coaching, focusing on the paperwork, because I'm living proof of sorting out the paperwork and the change it makes. And growing life around grief, because although the grief never goes, I do believe it's possible to create a beautiful and fabulous life around it, even taking our person with us into bereavement and beyond. So yeah, that's kind of me. I'm not very good at keeping up, though.
Well, based on the fact you said you weren't very good at kind of doing a little elevator pitch, I thought that was absolutely spot on, because I really get a feel for what you're kind of about, really. So, introduce us to your husband that you lost earlier. Then, what was his name?
So he was called Simon.
Yeah. And Simon, was he kind of aware that you were getting so organised? Because you did have a bit of a feeling, I guess, that this was coming, that his loss was coming. Was he part of that before he went, or was it kind of something that you galvanized along the way?
Yes and yes.
Yeah.
So yes, he was aware. Yes, he actually probably was better at actioning it than I am. I think the military is very good. When you suddenly have a mission, eyes are on the mission, and that is what you focus on. But I was definitely the catalyst in the background. I was definitely the one going, I'm going to need to know this. I'm going to need to know that. I'm going to need to know the other. So it was kind of a mixture of the two. And yet, even though I was very conscious that we had to have the tricky conversations and we had to organize ourselves, and he had to share certain stuff with me so that I'd know if there's still so much that we missed, and that
Yeah.
so I feel we share with the world through our mistakes as well as through what we did right. I think you sometimes learn the most through what you do wrong, don't you?
No, I agree completely, actually. I think, my personal life is littered with learning through my errors and mistakes and kind of like rooting about for information, which is kind of what really strikes me about what you're saying, that I don't know if you coined this phrase Sadmin, but I really like it. But when you were going through that and trying to discover what needed to be done, was there kind of an obvious route, or was there any information that helped you?
So this is really interesting. So it the like all amazing things, it wasn't original. It wasn't from me. And if you Google Sadmin, it's out there. I think I heard Reverend is it Reverend Richard Coles, who lost his partner, talk about the Sadmin after I'd started doing it. But I've trademarked it for my courses and for my challenges and my webinars and all the rest of it. So I've kind of borrowed it, shall we say, because I don't think it is hugely original, but it is kind of all that admin that's emotional that we struggle to do on our own. And there wasn't really a light bulb moment. I think, going back to my story that I said to you, I think it was more that point where I realized I was risking burning out as a lawyer. I kind of felt like I wasn't doing anything right. I wasn't giving everything to work because I was working part-time and I couldn't go above and beyond because I needed to get home for the children. And then I wasn't really there for the kids. It was always like, oh, mummy, why are you the last mummy to collect us, and all the rest of it. And that was just a horrible place to be. And, if you then talk about nervous system, I think when someone dies, you kind of live in that sympathetic fight or flight anyway. You're hyper vigilant. You're waiting for the next disaster because you've lost somebody and you don't want that to happen again. And I realized that actually I was very rarely in a peace and calm state. I was constantly frazzled. But it was fascinating because I felt like the universe and everyone in my world kept pulling me back to the Sadmin. And I keep being led by people. Like, I'll occasionally put stuff out and say, if I did this, would you be interested in it?
Yeah.
And trying to be guided by what will be useful and helpful to other people.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? When things develop like that, I think I often, like, my phrase is that I'm like leaning in. I don't necessarily have a plan to be doing a certain thing. It's like this podcast in a funny way, Emma. It came about because of a gap in what Si and I, the funeral director, saw as things that people didn't know. And where was this knowledge for them? And if they just wanted to ask a simple question like, do I really have to have flowers? It was like, where do you go for that? So I leaned into that in a way and said, right, we'll do something and we'll see if you find it helpful. And it's interesting. You think you're probably going to do about half a dozen episodes with half a dozen kind of topic areas. And then people start saying, well, what about this and what about that? And you think, gosh, it's got such a pathway in front of us that we didn't think was there. And I think one of the things that strikes me is about the fact that just in the moment in time, when you have, like you say, your world has just spun out of orbit, and all the patterns and regulators that you normally have in your life with your partner, or, the rhythms, the things you do, the dance you even do in the kitchen, the way you cook a meal together, everything is just changed completely. That's the time when you're supposedly supposed to get your act together and do all these technical kind of administration things, really. So it is super challenging, isn't it?
So what I'm hoping is that the more prepared people are, the better the emotional handrail is, and that's what I hope.
Yeah. And in a lot of couples, interesting, what I notice as a celebrant, I don't know if you notice this, is that often there's one partner who is the kind of admin of the team. Yeah. And they're the person, then they know all the things, they know whether, insurance policies are, and they know when the car needs MOT, and in like life things, as well as kind of stuff that needs to be sorted out at the point of someone dying. And you just think, oh no, if you weren't the admin person, there's a lot. There's a lot to kind of organize.
And actually, I love you for mentioning that, because actually that's something I'm really working on the first half of this year, is the tools that help people to communicate to their other key people, so that all they need to do is the data input, and then all that information is at the fingertips of either one of them. And then it doesn't matter whether you're the organised one or whether you're the one who's slightly challenged by all the paperwork. You've got that all at your fingertips, with reminders and all the telephone numbers and everything that's needed. Because when crisis happens, the last thing you want to be doing is rummaging around for bits of paper with a policy number and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and you see that in different ways. I mean, when in my world, when I'm either contacted by family, because people can contact me independently, or a funeral director makes a referral, I go and meet the family. And often the first thing I'll say is, were there any arrangements? Did anybody have any plans? And some people go, yes, these are all the plans. And I think, oh, that's a good starting place. And other people are like, well, there's a shoebox somewhere here that the mum put all bits and pieces in from other people's obituaries and stuff that she thought she'd like to look at. And other people are like, no idea. They never wanted to talk about it. You couldn't go there. So no, we don't know. And to be honest with our listeners, the folks who feel most lost are in that last group. So I really do encourage even people who get quite scared of talking about death and dying and their own mortality to just try and have some form of conversation, because whatever that might take for you, or write something down and say, I don't want to talk about it, but it's all in the blue folder, because as you quite rightly say, it is a big part of it all, actually.
And things and stories and hymns and prayers and whatever they might be, they mean more when you know the background. And it's one thing to say, oh, Gran really liked this hymn, to say, actually, Gran really liked this hymn because it was her favourite at her wedding, or it suddenly adds so much more to it. So I think it's a really lovely idea to put that background story in. And it fascinates me. I've got two teens who are so techie and so into their screens, yet we had a family roast with my parents the other day, and my 16-year-old and my 9-year-old nephew were fascinated about family history, about the objects on the table and where they came from and what the history was behind them. But if you don't capture those stories now, it's just a salt cellar or a fork or a this or a that, and it's just hasn't got that story behind it. And then it really links into the grief. And I'm really passionate that one of the things that helps with growing life around grief is the continuing bonds, and is the links we have with the person who's died. And it will be different because they're not physically with us anymore. So it's how can we have objects and music and things in our world that connect us to our person. And if we know the background stories, it makes it all so much easier.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And the way that people manage that kind of activity of grieving over time. And I was talking to somebody quite recently who she's lost her partner, and she doesn't want to do something that feels, for the children who are a bit younger, I think one of them's 12 and one's a little bit younger, that feels, to her words, morbid. So I said, well, what have you got in mind? And she said, like, her mum-in-law had said to her, well, how about, on the day of the death anniversary, we go and we lay flowers. And she said, I don't object to that. She said, but I don't want that to be the annual thing. She said, so what I've decided is we're going to celebrate his birthday. He always made a big fuss about how the kids had this caterpillar cake and he never got one and how annoying it was. And she said, and so the last year in which we knew he wasn't well, we made sure there was a caterpillar cake for his birthday. She said, so I'm going to do caterpillar cake every year on what would have been his birthday with the kids. And she said, and that's what I'm going to do, and we'll do maybe go on a walk or something. And I said, that sounds absolutely perfect. You must do what feels right for you. I like caterpillar cakes and think that's a very good idea. And we talked about it in that way. So that's what she's kind of working out. But it's so interesting, isn't it? Like what people think it's okay to do or not okay to do. Do you come across that, Emma?
Oh, all the time. I think society has too many shoulds. And, because of lovely Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages and all the rest of it, I've had one person come to me really, really upset because somebody had said, because she hasn't ever been angry, she hasn't processed her grief. And I was like, you don't have to go through all of them. That grief is, I always say to my clients, grief is as unique as the relationship you had to the person who died. So it's like a fingerprint or a snowflake. You're never going to have it. So there is no prescription for grief. There's no rule book for grief. And yeah, I mean, we have duck wraps on Simon's birthday because he used to love them. You've got to do what's right for you and your family. And I find it fascinating because I do think that sometimes the children struggle with the birthday and the adults sometimes struggle with other anniversary days, but the birthday seems to be quite a big one for the children. And that's where it's important to talk to the kids and, and so we sometimes do an activity that Daddy used to like and then have food that Daddy used to like, and then that's it. But some people want the whole day to be about their person. Some people actually would rather not. And that's where different emotions get a bad press. But I don't think any emotion is bad. I think they're all trying to tell us something. So denial is amazingly useful. If I hadn't been numb, I could never have done a eulogy in front of 500 people in a church. I needed that denial to be able to do that. And I think anger is often telling us that we're scared of something, whether it's life on our own or not having enough money or something, but often there's a fear behind anger. And if we listen to our emotions, we can scratch the surface and kind of learn to reparent ourselves. But yeah.
I think you're saying such important things for people to hear, Emma, because people often feel like they shouldn't feel X or they shouldn't feel Y. And if they feel a certain feeling, they're a bad person. Well, I shouldn't really feel like this. I mean, I was talking again to somebody recently about the sense of relief that they're feeling because their person was really poorly. The care setup at home was quite intense. And the person that has died has, been released from a painful condition. And that they were saying, oh, I just feel the sense of relief. With all the other things. And I said, it's okay to have all the feelings. The other thing about the emotions, feelings is it's not linear. It's not linear, is it? And it's neither is it like you only have one at a time. You can have joy and sadness in the same moment, in the same breath. So, it's kind of just so healthy that we're all starting to talk about this a little bit more.
Honestly, I can't tell you how excited I was when I got your message saying, would you come on the podcast? And I think this, some of the stuff you're saying as well is stuff that I say over and over again. You can feel relief and sadness and grief at the same time. You can feel pain and joy at the same time. And it's just understanding that the way you're grieving is perfect for you. It's all unique to all of us. And I often find that grief can put a metaphorical magnifying glass on stuff that's happened before. So sometimes when people come to me and they're stuck in their grief or there's something that's massive, it's often there's something else behind it, but it's so deeply in the subconscious that it's hard to access on their own. And that's where lovely Julia Samuels thing of like, grief can't heal in isolation. Grief needs to be talked about, it needs to be shared in order to heal.
And I can't remember now. I read so much about this. I can't remember the author, but somebody once wrote, say his name, which was all about people think they're being really kind and helpful, not to mention it. Let's not talk about the war, so don't mention Simon, don't ever go there. But actually, the speaking of somebody's name in any way, saying, oh, is that something they enjoyed? Or, hey, have you been thinking a lot about them lately? Is so powerful as a point of connection with another human to say, look, I really care. So this is so good to be talking about this. What would you recommend to people then who find themselves in the place where it's either about to happen, that they're going to have to do all this stuff, or they're in the midst of it? What helpfully can happen for them, Emma? What would you suggest?
So I think this goes to like, do you have like a secret life hack for keeping your sanity when you're dealing with all of this? And I had quite a big think about this concept, and what came to me is actually I don't have a secret and I don't have a life hack. Tricky things are tricky, and sometimes we just got to acknowledge that they're tricky, and be open with what we find hard. And especially if people are neurodivergent or something like that, they might find that I'm massively into how unique we all are, but they might find that they find something hard that other people find easy. And so I think the one thing I would say is that tricky things are easier done with support. But also when you're dealing with the funerals and the concept of death about to happen, it's being super, super, super kind to yourself, because what you don't necessarily realize is you are already grieving. So it's that whole concept of anticipatory grief. And I thought, why I was surprised I took so much compassionate leave is I thought I'd done loads of my grieving while he was still alive. It would take nothing, especially having the children, for me to burst into floods of tears, because everything we were doing, I was wondering if it was going to be the last time that we did this with him and the kids. And last time he pushed the kids on, I was desperate for him to teach our younger daughter to ride a bicycle because he taught the older one. And it was all of those things that and so you've got so many emotions, you need to do the practical stuff, but you've got all this bubbling away inside of you, which means that sometimes unexpected emotions can bubble up. So you're doing the paperwork, but suddenly you feel raging or you feel really upset. And it may not be the paperwork, it might just have triggered something else that's going on. So I think that sometimes we don't know what emotion we're feeling until we've had a chance to process it. And it's just being kind on ourselves that, it's okay to feel whatever we're feeling. So I actually don't say anything massively practical other than support and connection and being kind to each other and to ourselves. And I think sometimes we're so kind to other people, especially if you've got children or the person is dying themselves, it becomes all about them, all about the children having the quality time, all about the patient. And actually we forget about being kind to ourselves. So I often say to people, when you're making a drink, just make sure you add yourself into the list of making a drink, because and it then goes out wider, but we so often forget to be kind to ourselves. And I think that that's really important, because often we're the person who's keeping the cogs going. So yeah, kindness, I guess.
Yeah. I saw a beautiful example of that when I was working in the hospice as a nurse, and somebody had a family member who was dying at home, and it was a big family, so I could see this person in the middle of it all accommodating everybody else. And on the day of the death, the community nurse phoned me, and she said, I'm just checking in with you, Tina, that this is okay, because the person died at 2 a.m, but they haven't called us in till 8 o'clock in the morning because and she said, does it matter that there's been that big gap? And I said, no, not at all. I said, why do you think that happened? She said, well, she says she just wanted time with him on her own. And I could really get that, because this was just a space for her to kind of, I don't know, have a conversation that she wanted to have, but also just have space for herself and a bit of time to get herself ready for the next thing.
I'm
I could
very
really understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very happy to share. So Simon died in the morning, and his family came down, which I was adamant I wanted them to come down, and they thankfully did, and so they were there. But the moment he died, I felt like I chased his spirit out of the room. I feel very woo about it. And then I went to that lovely little pagoda in the middle of the garden, and the heavens opened, and it was like the world was crying with me. And I left his family to have some time with him. Then when they started to talk to me about all the practical stuff, they came out and started to talk to me about all the practical stuff. They said, you're next of kin, you're going to have to do it all. And I turned around and I said, am I allowed to just have some time with him? And I, to this day, have no idea how long I spent, but everyone else had gone. And I went back and I lay with his dead body, like literally cuddled up and with my hand for ages. I think I needed it. to actually process the fact that he had gone,
Mm.
because he'd been poorly for so long. It was anticipated and it wasn't a surprise. But I always say, although it's not a surprise, it can still be a monumental shock. And what can be a shock is not just that they've finally gone, but your feelings.
Yeah.
And I just had so many feelings, and I just needed that moment to still be with him and near him and snuggled up to him, even though he was dead. So
Mm.
I can totally and utterly get that.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's no rush, is there? I think that's the thing, a great message to leave for people is there is absolutely no rush to be doing
No.
anything at all, actually. So yeah, so this is really good advice for people. What do you wish advice that someone had told you before you started down this road then?
More discussions. So like I was saying, we thought we'd prepared. And if you don't know what discussions you want to have, find out, ask people about what they wish they'd had, who'd been in situation. I'm always happy for people to message me, but we thought that we'd spoken about so much, yet I had, and he told me about a military burial and what, which people were going to hold what and all the rest of it. But I had no hymn, no prayer and no reading. So I had to really rely on the military padre and kind of my own. I had no idea that there was a catalogue of options for coffins. That like really threw me. Like when they said, what coffin do you want? And I was like, and then they got out this like brochure and I was like, oh my God, like I've got no idea. I think this is why I get so excited about your podcast, Tina, but it's you don't know what you don't know. So it's like if having the good goodbye is important to you, is listening to all these podcasts and absorbing all the information, because it's so important we talk about it.
Yeah. And listeners will know I've said this before, but I don't apologize for repeating it, that talking about all this is a bit like when you talk about sex, you are not going to get pregnant. So talking about death and dying is not going to bring it on any sooner. It's a very superstitious belief I think a lot of us have, that something bad will happen if we kind of open up these conversations. So this is really, really useful. And Emma, I'm definitely going to be putting all of your details in the show notes so people can find their way to Emma. She's on LinkedIn and she has her own website, and there'll be other ways you can find your way to her. She has some great resources and also did a really good thing last year. I don't know if you're going to repeat it, but about kind of a will week. So if you're one of these people, there's a long list of them. Whenever I ask people to put their hand up in a room, many people do put their hands up and say, no, I haven't written my will, and no, I haven't done this, I haven't done that, because they're fearful of it. But that option to think about your will. Will you be doing it this year, Emma? That
I do it every year. It's
fabulous.
My gift to the world. It's linking my old legal world with all the rest of it, but everyone should have a will. And people tell me off for doing it for free, but it will always be for free.
Oh, fantastic. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity, everybody listening. So do check that out. So Emma, then, thinking about any final words you want to have for our guests before I ask you about your own funeral?
Any final things? I think, yes, it links into when you mentioned, when you were giving me kind of details about this, about a superpower. I think that the superpower we all have and we don't resource enough is sleep. And I think that none of us can manage any of this if we are exhausted. The world becomes overwhelming and big and difficult and emotional and all the rest of it. And it can be really uncomfortable to sleep and get rest if you've got a brain that's happier when it's preoccupied and distracted and all the rest of it. But actually learning to find a way to get enough sleep, at least 8 hours a night. My kids will tell you I'm a different person. So I think my last piece of advice is the kindest thing you can do for yourself is make sure you're rested.
That is a fantastic piece of advice. And I think a lot of people will have sleep disturbance around that, around grief. It's one of the big ones actually that people don't mention. They might mention it in the immediacy after the loss. They'll say, oh, you might not have an appetite and sleep well, but as time goes on, I mean, even the act of sleeping in a bed when you might have had a partner in that bed it's a big thing to kind of wrap your head around. So yeah, and I can, yeah, yeah. Yeah, sorry, I can absolutely see why that would be the case. So Emma, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for giving your time to it. So I am going to ask you, at your own funeral, what would you like to happen?
Okay, so it won't surprise you that I've written my own order of service.
I'm
So
loving this. Yes, what's going on then?
I've literally written the whole thing, but it also won't surprise anyone who knows me very well. I can't remember what's in it. So I need to pull it out and remind myself. There's little parts that have lots, everything's got a reason. So when I've put a poem in or when I've put a reading in, I've said this is because, so Corinthians is in there because Corinthians was at our wedding. There's Lord of the Dance because I like it, even though lots of people don't, because that was at our wedding as well. And there's a few things that I've put the reason, but I've also put at the top of all of it, and I've put where I want to be cremated, and that my family are going to hate me because I want to be cremated at 3 different locations, all of which are probably going to be really windy, so they're going to get covered. But I've also said that I think the other thing we don't talk enough about funeral plans is it's like a birth plan, in that you can plan it, but you've got to be aware it's for the living as much as it is for the dead. So they might tweak it, they might change it, they might amend it. And like a birth plan, you know, we go to NCT and one of the big things is have your birth plan, and actually I'm yet to meet someone whose birth went according to the plan. You know, it goes out the window from moment one, but what it does is it's that emotional handrail again of giving options, and that's what I'm hoping my funeral wishes are, is that it's options for my loved ones to do or not do according to how they think is best, because I am quite aware that the funeral is kind of for the living. It's their goodbye, and it's when you're writing your funeral it's useful to be mindful of that rather than just dictating.
Yeah, fantastic advice. What a great place to end. Well, whenever we get to that point, which we hope is a long way away, Emma, you know, it's great that you're so organised. No surprises. So it's been
everything.
and everything, I know. So thank you so much for being with us. You've been listening to Tina and Emma, and this has been Good Goodbyes. Thank you.
You've been listening to Good Goodbyes, the Funeral Facts podcast. Please do like, subscribe, comment and share. Drop any questions on our social media, on Instagram, or in the text option in the show notes.
Si and I are qualified professionals, but we always advise our clients to seek any additional support from medical practitioners if they need to. And we hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay well and be kind to one another.